Have you ever wondered what happens when the person tasked with protecting lives is told they're standing in the way of progress? My name is Dr. Reyes. For nearly a decade, I was the lead AI ethics engineer at Neuropulse Health Systems, a medical technology company based in Boston. We weren't building dating apps or delivery algorithms. We were designing diagnostic AI used by real doctors on real patients. A single line of code could decide whether someone lived or died. When I started, we were a small team, driven by purpose. I helped architect the entire compliance framework that got us FDA certification. We built something responsible, something safe. But as the company scaled, something changed. The new leadership wasn't interested in building carefully anymore. They wanted speed, market share, growth at all costs. They called me rigid, said I was too cautious, that I was blocking innovation. Then they fired me. 3 weeks later, the system I built, the one they stripped down and rewired without understanding, misdiagnosed a cancer patient. And suddenly, the phone calls started. This is the story of how I was dismissed, then begged to return. Of what happens when corporations forget that safety isn't a suggestion. It's the foundation. When I joined Neuropulse Health Systems, we weren't even called that yet. Back then, we were Signal Gen Diagnostics, operating out of a shared biotech incubator in Cambridge with mismatched chairs and a single espresso machine that broke more often than it worked. The company had just raised its Series A, and I was employee number 12. I had left a tenure-track position in computational medicine at Stanford because I believed in something more than academia. I believed in building technology that could actually change lives. What drew me in wasn't flashy. It was a pitch deck scribbled on a whiteboard and a conviction in the eyes of Lisa Tran, the co-founder and then CEO. Lisa wasn't like most startup founders I'd met. She wasn't trying to disrupt healthcare. She was trying to fix it. She told me, "We don't just need accurate AI, we need accountable AI." That stuck with me. It still does. From the very beginning, my job wasn't just about writing code or tuning algorithms. It was about designing the ethical guardrails, everything from audit trails and decision explainability to compliance with HIPAA and the FDA's evolving guidance on medical AI. In a world rushing to automate diagnosis, we were deliberately slow, deliberately thoughtful. We knew the cost of getting it wrong. Over the next few years, we grew fast. Government pilot programs, strategic hospital partnerships, awards for innovation in responsible AI. I worked 12-hour days without blinking, not because I had to, but because it felt like we were doing something that mattered. I helped create the dynamic risk-aware processing engine, or DRAPE as the engineers jokingly called it behind my back. Not the best acronym, admittedly, but it was a real innovation. It assessed both clinical context and AI confidence before escalating decisions to human physicians. It saved time, but more importantly, it protected patients from statistical blind spots. As the company expanded, I was given a team. 4 engineers, 2 compliance analysts, and a part-time ethicist on loan from MIT. We weren't the rock stars. That title belonged to the data scientists who demoed our AI to investors using flawless case studies. But our team was the skeleton crew keeping the operations safe and legal. Lisa understood that. She shielded us when timelines got aggressive. She pushed for audits even when they slowed down releases. And when budget cuts came, she fought to keep our security review cycles intact. I still remember the day we got our FDA green light. It was 7:14 p.m. and we were all still in the office. Lisa walked out of her corner space holding her phone like it was a newborn. "We did it," she whispered. The next 2 hours were a blur of champagne and high fives and a sense that everything was about to change. For the better. But nothing gold lasts in a startup. After a successful Series D raise, the board decided it was time to professionalize leadership. Lisa stepped down, moved to a board advisor role, and in came Darren Kessler, former CTO of a failed telehealth platform that had grown fast and crashed faster. He had the pedigree, MIT, Google, a book deal, but no background in regulated medical systems. His philosophy was simple: Move faster, automate more, reduce overhead. From day one, Darren treated my team like we were dead weight. He called our model review process artificial friction. He questioned why we needed human-in-the-loop verification for high-risk diagnoses. During one leadership sync, I explained the need for multi-step validation before releasing updated neural weights into production. He interrupted with a smirk. Why don't we just A/B test models in the wild and let the better one win? I wish I were exaggerating. By that point, we had AI running in over 50 hospitals, scanning thousands of imaging reports a day. Every decision mattered. And Darren's idea of innovation was to replace caution with guesswork, live. Some of the younger team leads bought into his energy. He promised faster deployment cadences and bigger bonuses. But those of us who had been there from the beginning knew what we were risking. Lisa reached out to me privately during this time. I'm worried, she admitted. They're chasing quarterly gains and calling it transformation. I started documenting everything. Every pushback, every skipped audit, every suggestion to relax model thresholds for sensitivity. I wasn't paranoid. I was preparing for what I feared might become a defense. Still, part of me hoped I was wrong. Maybe Darren would grow into the role. Maybe the pressure would ease. Maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't go so far as to put real patients at risk. I kept working, kept doing the job. Because the people we were serving, the hospitals, the doctors, the patients, they didn't see any of this internal drama. They just saw the tool and trusted it to be right. And that trust was everything, so I stayed. Even as it got harder. Even as the cracks began to show. Even as I realized that, for Darren, innovation didn't mean building smarter systems, it meant building cheaper ones. It meant faster results, regardless of how brittle the architecture underneath had become. I knew something was coming. I just didn't know how fast it would arrive or how much damage would be done when it did. The shift didn't happen all at once. It started with words, subtle at first. Efficiency, streamlining, lean ops. Darren used them, like mantras in every all-hands meeting. He painted our careful design process as outdated, claiming we were lagging behind non-traditional health tech competitors. Competitors, I should note, that weren't bound by the same federal oversight. To the board, his confidence sounded like leadership. To me, it sounded like recklessness. At first, my objections were met with polite nods. Darren would thank me for my perspective, and then do exactly what he planned to do. But it didn't take long before the friction became visible. He began pushing a new product line, diagnostic support for low-resource rural clinics. It sounded noble. In reality, it was a strategy to rush out an untested lightweight version of our engine with stripped-down safeguards. No clinical partner review, no oversight committee, just minimal validation and a flashy demo for investors. When I brought up the FDA's post-market monitoring obligations, Darren said, "This isn't a full medical device, it's clinical decision support." I reminded him that our own internal policies held these tools to the same safety standards. He didn't answer. He just stared at me and asked, "Evan, do you want to scale this company?" That was the first time I realized he saw me not as a contributor, but an obstacle. The following week, he cut our quarterly audit window from 4 weeks to 7 days. "Ship fast, iterate fast," he declared, quoting a mantra better suited to social media platforms than to healthcare diagnostics. My team scrambled to keep up. We missed edge case anomalies, small things, but enough to leave gaps in the logs. I stayed late trying to patch them manually, but the infrastructure wasn't designed for speed. It was designed for caution, for integrity. Then came the changes to our approval hierarchy. Previously, any major diagnostic threshold adjustment required sign-off from both our data science and ethics teams. Darren bypassed that entirely. He created an AI Ops Council, stacked with technical staff who were incentivized by release velocity. Overnight, years of policy and process were rendered optional. I pushed back. I submitted a formal concern to our risk officer, citing patient safety and compliance violations. 2 days later, the risk officer, Mariah, was reassigned to non-operational functions. I never saw her at a production meeting again. Whispers began to spread. "Don't make too much noise," someone in compliance told me quietly. "He's backed by the board." Another engineer, Ravi, warned me, "They're drawing a target on your back. Just keep your head down." But how could I? I wasn't defending a product. I was defending patients who couldn't see the changes happening behind the curtain, defending the idea that AI in medicine is only as good as the ethics that govern it. This wasn't just about company policy anymore. It was about the lives that would be impacted if we got it wrong. Then one afternoon I noticed something strange. The logging server for our inference engine had been quietly redirected. Access control had changed. What used to be a read-only record of all diagnostic decisions was now being funneled into a general data stream, one that lacked secure timestamps and metadata preservation. In plain terms, it meant someone could alter logs after the fact and no one would notice. I flagged it immediately. My concern went ignored. Later that week, I walked into a deployment meeting and noticed my name wasn't listed on the new model sign-off chain. When I asked Darren about it, he smiled like I was being naive. "We're empowering teams to own their velocity," he said. "We don't need bottlenecks in the loop." I wasn't a bottleneck. I was the final check. I asked him plainly, "Do you know what happens when this thing gets something wrong and there's no audit trail?" He leaned in casually. "Then we issue a patch and move on, just like everyone else." That's when I knew I was done being careful behind closed doors. I wrote an internal memo, detailing every deviation from policy, every change that compromised our ethical guidelines, every corner cut. I CC'd legal, compliance, and 3 board observers. Within 48 hours, HR booked a transition planning meeting on my calendar. No subject line. Just a location and 2 names, Darren Kessler and Elena from HR. I didn't need to attend the meeting to know what was coming, but I went. Anyway, I sat down across from Darren, who looked almost bored. He opened a folder with my name on it and began with the familiar script. "We're evolving our operational model. With new priorities, we're restructuring certain roles." I stayed silent. Elena slid a severance document across the table. It was generous. 6 months' pay, benefits, NDA language. A small thank you for staying quiet. Darren, in his polished tone, added, "Your contributions were foundational, but we need to scale with speed." I didn't sign. Not right away. I looked him in the eye and said, "You've removed every safeguard we put in place. You've blinded the system and deleted the map." He shrugged. "We have a new map now." I stood, walked out without another word, and sat alone in my car for nearly an hour. Not angry, not shocked, just profoundly sad, because I knew what was coming next. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but soon. And when it came, I knew who they'd call. The official meeting lasted less than 15 minutes, but the aftershock echoed for days. I walked out of that room without signing the severance agreement. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I simply couldn't bring myself to put my name next to something that would bind me to silence, not after what I'd seen unravel. Still, I knew the clock had started ticking. I was on borrowed time. No longer part of the system, just a ghost with privileged access. For now. That afternoon, my system credentials still worked. Either someone forgot to revoke them immediately, or they assumed I'd just walk away. But I didn't. I logged in, not to cause damage, not even to interfere, but to ensure what I'd built wouldn't collapse entirely in my absence. I backed up personal design notes, schematics for the integrity check routines, segmentation logic for patient data flows, documentation drafts that were never greenlit for publication. None of it contained proprietary data, just process architecture. My work, my thinking, my legacy, and then I walked away. For the next 2 days, I did nothing, or at least it looked like nothing. I took long walks, revisited old notebooks, replayed conversations I should have handled differently, but mostly I waited for the other shoe to drop. You don't strip out core safety layers in a live diagnostic system and not expect consequences. The system I had built was designed to fail gracefully, with containment, isolation, and rollback procedures. But those mechanisms had been dismissed as excessive overhead. Now they were gone. It didn't take long. By day 3, I received a message, not through work, of course, but on my personal phone. It was from Tasha, the QA lead who had always respected the quiet integrity of my team. Her text was vague at first. "Hey, can you talk? Something weird's going on with the prediction logs. I think it's tied to your old audit layer." That was all I needed to know. I called her immediately. Within 5 minutes, I was staring at a shared screen over Zoom as she showed me a live system dashboard that no longer made sense. A diagnostic AI had flagged a benign mass in a pediatric patient as non-critical, missing a key indicator embedded in the second-level scan. Normally, that would have triggered an alert for human review, but the fallback protocol had failed to activate. No one caught it until a nurse manually double-checked the report 2 days later. The patient's surgery had to be expedited. The hospital filed a formal escalation. And now, the FDA had been notified. Why didn't the escalation protocol run? I asked. Tasha hesitated. Because the escalation protocol was part of your ethics check module. Darren's team removed it. She sounded exhausted, unsure if she was even supposed to be telling me this, but she wasn't looking for blame. She was looking for help. They're all scrambling now, she added. Legal is involved. Darren is blaming QA, but nobody can explain why the fallback didn't fire. They don't even know it existed. I only remembered because of something you said months ago about the dual threshold confidence check. I nodded slowly. Did they disable the probabilistic override layer too? They might have, she said. I don't even know where it lives in the codebase anymore. I did. Of course I did. I had written it across 3 modules, intentionally abstracted, because the architecture required loose coupling to prevent cascading failures. It wasn't in any one document. It was a philosophy as much as a function. Can you help? She asked quietly. I paused. I wanted to say yes, because I cared, because the child mattered more than the system. But this wasn't just a technical issue anymore. It was political, legal, reputational, and I no longer worked there. I can't just jump in, I said carefully, but I'm willing to consult, under contract. That means limited access, no liability, and an hourly rate. She didn't argue. I'll tell Darren. An hour later, my phone rang. Darren. I didn't answer. He called again. Then came the email, terse, professional, but unmistakably urgent. We're requesting your assistance for a legacy module you were involved in. Please respond at your earliest availability. I responded with my terms, 750 hour, 4-hour minimum, prepaid. A standard consulting clause. I also included a stipulation, full indemnity for any actions taken based on my input, and a signed acknowledgement that I was no longer responsible for the system's integrity. Darren didn't balk. He agreed within the hour, but before I joined the call, I checked the system logs again, this time from a public dataset tied to one of our open access research projects. Sure enough, the warning signals were visible there too. System drift, inference spikes. A degradation pattern I'd flagged years ago that always preceded critical misfires. I joined the emergency call the next morning. Half the leadership team was on the line, plus 2 external auditors. The room, virtual though it was, felt tense, unsteady. I was introduced awkwardly, and then someone asked, "Dr. Reyes, can you walk us through what might have gone wrong?" I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply said, "You're experiencing a blind spot in the confidence scoring mechanism because the dual-layer ethics module was removed. Without it, the system no longer knows when to doubt itself." Silence. Darren finally spoke. "We weren't aware it was embedded across so many components." "You weren't aware," I said evenly, "because you never asked, and you never listened when I warned you what would happen." I guided them through the temporary fix, advised them on immediate rollbacks, recommended a third-party risk assessment, and when the call ended, I sent my invoice. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive, but I was done being ignored. For a few days after that call, it seemed like the emergency had passed, at least on the surface. Neuropulse issued a carefully worded statement to its hospital partners citing a non-critical anomaly in a legacy diagnostic module. Internally, though, I knew they were in full containment mode. The system hadn't failed just once. It had shown signs of structural degradation in multiple models that had been altered without full regression testing, without safeguards, without the invisible scaffolding I'd spent years weaving into place. Still, I stepped back. I had done what I was paid to do. No more. No less. Then came the breach. It didn't look like a breach at first. It looked like noise. Irregular data entries in hospital logs, unexpected upticks in query volume, latency spikes in cloud inference engines. But I recognized the pattern immediately. Someone, or something, was probing the system, using synthetic data to test its limits, not just for fun, for access. This wasn't an amateur phishing attempt or brute force. It was coordinated, technical, and highly informed. They were using Neuropulse's own architecture against itself. That's when Tasha called again. "They don't believe me," she said, barely getting the words out. "But I think someone's inside the system. Not just a glitch. Inside. Can you check something?" I hesitated. "I'm not under contract anymore." "I know," she said. "But this isn't about Darren or the company. This is about the hospitals, about the patients." So I looked. Using a public analytics mirror, still exposed through one of the older research APIs, I ran a metadata comparison script I'd built years earlier. Within 15 minutes I saw it. Injection artifacts, fragments of malformed query structures designed to bypass model verification layers. Someone had found a way to generate diagnostic suggestions without triggering confidence thresholds. That meant they could manipulate what the AI saw, and by extension what it told doctors. I didn't need to see a patient's name or a hospital's IP to understand the scale of the threat. If even one of those spoof suggestions made it into a live clinical workflow, someone could be misdiagnosed or worse. I documented everything, packaged it into a secure report, and sent it to Tasha with a single note. "You need to escalate this. Immediately." Hours passed, then a day, then the news broke. A Level 1 trauma hospital in Chicago issued a public advisory that a diagnostic tool had returned a false negative in a critical cardiac patient. The patient survived, thanks to human intuition from a resident physician. But it was enough. The FDA issued an investigation notice. Journalists caught the scent. Suddenly, Neuropulse was back in the headlines, not as a pioneering health tech innovator, but as a cautionary tale of what happens when companies chase velocity and sacrifice safety. I watched it unfold from a distance. News tickers, LinkedIn posts. An anonymous quote from an internal engineering source referenced a dismantled ethics module and audit trail. My phone began buzzing with messages from former colleagues, journalists, even attorneys, and eventually, from Darren himself. He left a voicemail. His voice, once so self-assured, now trembled slightly. "Evan, we need to talk. The breach, it's serious. We need your expertise, please." I listened twice. I didn't call back right away. Instead, I received another message, this time from someone else entirely. Dr. Alina Chowdhury, head of AI oversight at Veritas Labs, a non-profit organization working with the federal government to develop standards for ethical AI in healthcare. I had heard of them. I'd even referenced one of their white papers in a compliance workshop 2 years earlier. Her message was short but direct. "We've been following the situation at Neuropulse. We believe you're the person who built the original safeguards. Would you be open to a conversation?" I agreed. We spoke the next day. Alina wasn't interested in the gossip. She wanted to know about the architecture, the systemic vulnerabilities, and what could be learned from what was happening. The conversation was different, measured, intelligent, respectful. It reminded me of the earliest days at SignalGen, when we talked about medicine like it was sacred, not just scalable. After we hung up, I finally returned Darren's call. He didn't waste time. Evan, we've lost visibility into the East Coast node clusters. Logs are corrupted. QA can't trace system decisions. Tasha said you might know how to restore the parallel checks. Did you disable the recursive validation job? I asked. There was a pause. Yes, it was flagged as redundant. It wasn't redundant, I replied. It was your last line of defense, he sighed. Can you help us restore it? Not without a contract. We can agree to your previous terms. Double it, I said. And I want a written statement, absolving me of all responsibility for any past decisions made without my involvement. Again, no hesitation. Done. That night I stayed up restoring what pieces I could from the public sandbox versions I still had. The breach had exposed not just flaws in the system, but in the leadership's belief that software was interchangeable, that safety could be replicated with a checkbox, that engineers like me were fungible. But systems are more than code. Their knowledge, their judgment, their memory. And Neuropulse had wiped all of that clean. Now, they were paying the price. The temporary patch I provided bought Neuropulse just enough time to stabilize their core inference system. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't resilient, but it stopped the immediate threat, at least on paper. Internally, chaos still reigned. Investigators were asking questions no one had real answers to. The engineering leads couldn't explain the missing modules because they hadn't built them. The system documentation was full of gaps I had warned about years ago. What they didn't realize, what no one except maybe Tasha suspected, was that there was still one last layer in the architecture. A shadow protocol I had implemented after a 2018 near miss, buried deep in the monitoring engine. It wasn't part of any official spec. I hadn't even named it in our internal wiki. It was my insurance policy, an adaptive ethics scaffold that quietly observed, flagged anomalies, and stored its records in a ring buffer inaccessible through normal admin credentials. Designed to trigger only under specific conditions, unexpected configuration drift, regression in sensitivity accuracy, or abnormal query-to-inference ratios, it had been sitting dormant for years. Until now. When I remotely accessed the failsafe archive using one of the legacy diagnostic sandboxes, what I saw confirmed my worst suspicion. The breach wasn't random. It had been aided, unintentionally, by Darren's restructuring. In removing so-called redundant systems, they had broken the isolation between internal testing environments and live production servers. A single toggle, likely flipped during one of their rushed deployments, had disabled strict IP filtering, exposing hospital-facing endpoints to external data traffic. And that's how the attacker got in. I compiled everything: evidence logs, timeline reconstruction, the internal decision trail. Then I did what I always did. I wrote a report. But this time, I sent it not only to Darren and the executive team, but to Neuropulse's legal counsel and their board's audit committee. The reaction was immediate. 2 board members called an emergency session. Legal issued a moratorium on all new deployments. An external security firm was brought in to validate my findings. And for the first time, someone in leadership asked me a question I'd never heard before from them. What do we need to do to make this right? I didn't sugarcoat it. You need to restore the ethical framework. Fully. Reinstate tiered review. Reinforce model transparency. And stop treating regulatory compliance as a checkbox. It's an operating principle. Or it should be. They listened. I wasn't interested in returning. The damage wasn't just technical, it was cultural. And culture doesn't change with a contract or a consultant. But there was satisfaction in seeing the truth exposed, in watching the internal spin fall apart under scrutiny. Tasha later told me Darren had been placed on administrative leave while the board investigated his decisions. His name quietly disappeared from the company's org chart within a week. No press release, no statement, just gone. More satisfying still were the public corrections. Neuropulse's leadership issued a revised statement acknowledging that the diagnostic system had suffered critical architecture misalignments due to accelerated structural changes. It was the most corporate way of saying, We broke something we didn't understand, but it was more honesty than I'd expected. That same day, 3 hospitals publicly announced they were pausing their use of Neuropulse's AI tools pending internal review. The company's stock dipped, recovered, then dipped again as more details surfaced. But I had already moved on. Veritas Labs offered me a permanent position leading a new initiative, an open-source framework for ethical AI deployment in clinical environments. The idea was simple: create an architecture standard any hospital or startup could adopt, ensuring transparency, accountability, and patient-first design. It was everything I'd spent years advocating for, finally with the institutional backing, to make it real. My first task was leading a team to reverse engineer real-world AI breakdowns. Unsurprisingly, the Neuropulse case became our pilot study. With permission from their board, eager now to show commitment to reform, we reconstructed the decision chain that had led to the breach. And in the process, something strange happened. Clients, who had left Neuropulse, began reaching out to Veritas, asking how they could rebuild AI into their workflows, this time the right way. Many of them asked for my personal involvement. One CIO from a major regional health network said bluntly, "We trust you because you were the one who told them no." Vindication doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in emails from people who finally understand what you stood for, in colleagues who say, "You were right," in new roles where your warnings are seen not as resistance, but as responsibility. A month later, I was invited to speak at a closed-door session for federal regulators on the future of AI safety. I stood in front of policy leaders, doctors, ethicists, and engineers and walked them through what went wrong and what never should have been allowed to happen. I didn't use buzzwords. I didn't cast blame. I told them what I'd always believed. When you build systems that make decisions about human lives, the first question shouldn't be, "How fast can we deploy this?" It should be, "Who will be harmed if we get it wrong?" And for the first time in years, I felt like someone was listening. 6 months after the breach, Neuropulse had stabilized, technically at least. Public confidence would take longer to recover. Their name became a case study at industry conferences, a cautionary slide in presentations titled "When Speed Overwrites Safety." Meanwhile, I was leading a team of engineers, clinicians, and ethicists at Veritas Labs, helping design the very frameworks I once had to fight for inside closed doors. Looking back, I don't feel anger anymore. What I feel is clarity. I wasn't fired for failing. I was fired for refusing to compromise. And in the end, that refusal became my greatest value. In regulated industries, especially healthcare, moving fast isn't impressive. Moving responsibly is, because eventually every company pays the cost of safety. The question is whether they pay it up front, or after everything's already gone wrong. Sometimes it takes losing something you built to finally build the thing that matters more. So now I ask you, what do you think is the right balance between innovation and responsibility? Where's the line? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe we need more voices advocating for ethics in tech, then consider subscribing. Not just for the stories, but for the bigger conversations we all need to have. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.